Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you're all set up. I'm Representative Mark Uglem, and I represent Champlin and parts of Coon Rapids. And I'm joined here this morning with numerous friends and legislators, professionals, and we're going to talk about our distracted driving bill. Representative Frank Hornstein and myself, in a bipartisan manner, are set to introduce a distracted driving bill. And this is a bill that we feel we must introduce to stop the carnage on our roads today. We have severe difficulties with many accidents and many families that are being torn apart by distracted driving. This bill, we are not reinventing the wheel. There are 14 other states that have hands-free electronic device regulations. And if you've traveled to Illinois or Chicago, you know what I mean. This bill, it's very important. We do not outlaw cell phone use in a car. You can still call, but it has to be hands-free. This type of legislation has long been necessary in the state of Minnesota. It just is the right thing to do to protect families and to protect yourselves as you drive down the road. I want to tell you a just quick little story. This weekend, Sunday, I was coming home from the lake, and I drive a Ford F-150, and I'm on Highway 10, coming south out of St. Cloud. I'm in a right-hand lane, doing somewhere close to the speed limit, and a car came up alongside me. And this car began to drift into my lane. So I honked the horn. The individual driving the car didn't even look over. I looked, and they were using a cell phone and texting. I honked the horn again. The individual took off. In the back seat were two young kids in their car seats. That's why I'm doing this bill. I'd like to introduce Representative Frank Hornstein, my co-author on this bipartisan bill. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to our press conference. And I want to especially thank Representative Uglem for his leadership in this arena. And my colleague who you'll be hearing from in a little while, Representative Newberger, and we also have Senator Carlson here. You know, in terms of really a message that we want to send through this bill to Minnesota, it's simply this: put this down, put it away when you're driving. And the reason that we feel so strongly about this is that among the three major reasons that we have traffic deaths and fatalities and injuries, we have speeding, we have impairment and fatigue, and distraction. And what we are learning, we've heard so many stories from our constituents similar to the one that Representative Uglem said. This is an urgent concern throughout the state. Whether it's in the metro or in greater Minnesota, so many families are affected by the deaths and injuries that are taking place because of distraction. We recently had, just a couple of years ago, a young woman biking on a rural road killed. We've had an increase in pedestrian fatalities that has been reported in recent months, and the increase is attributed in large part to distraction. So it is also keeping our roads safe for the driving public, for those that choose to bike and to walk as well. And finally, and we will hear more about this, as the author of the original texting while driving ban in 2008, we now know from law enforcement it will be much more effective to enforce that provision if law enforcement sees the fact that people are not on a handheld device. And we'll be hearing more about that later. But one of the reasons is that we know that talking on a handheld device while driving significantly is a significant distraction, but we also have an enforcement mechanism for the texting ban. So we also know that there'll be less texting as a result of this legislation. So thank you very much, and we'll be hearing now from our Senate author, Senator Carlson.
This is yours.
Thank you very much to each and every one of you for coming. This is certainly a moment of pride for me because I've sponsored this bill 3 times before, and we just couldn't get all the players to agree on it that this was a serious issue. And I think now that we've gotten better information from the State Patrol on what types of precursors are to the kinds of accidents of inattentive driving, this is now the next step. 2 years ago, I sponsored a bill that increased the fine for texting in your second charge, and that was a good thing to do. But the problem is, of course, that people sometimes were using the excuse that they were telephoning, and that was not included with texting. So now, and we've all been there, when you're at a stoplight and the person ahead of you doesn't seem to get going, and you're wondering what they're doing, and then you see that they might have a phone on their lap or a phone pasted to their steering wheel. And they're not paying attention to driving, and that's one of the biggest problems we have is the inattentive driving. When I sponsored another bill, which was the enhanced penalty for inattentive driving that results in a great bodily harm or a death, we managed to get over that hurdle where the prosecutors could not charge someone with anything greater than a misdemeanor. This is now a watershed moment. So what we are doing now is a bipartisan support for a bill that is just waiting to come. And as it was said before, there's a lot of states that have already passed it. I know that California, where my daughter lives, has passed it. And right now, everyone, let's see, there's a major number of cars, almost all the new cars, have the ability to have Bluetooth in them. So there's no excuse for not having a hands-free use for a cell phone. So I'm pleased to be part of this. I'm pleased to sponsor it again in the Minnesota Senate, and I'm pleased that we have a bipartisan support. So thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Paul Austin from the Minnesota Safety Council.
Thanks, Jim. Oops, sorry. Hi, my name is Paul Austin. I'm with the Minnesota Safety Council. The Safety Council has been part of the traffic safety conversation since 1928, and we're very, very happy to be part of this conversation today. I'd like to thank the group that's gathered here and the other supporters that are in the room. I mean, these are collective efforts, and it's a focal point in time that's the product of a lot of work by a lot of folks over time. I've got a series of numbers I want to put out in front of you. Some of these numbers have been alluded to, some of them are new, but they're worth repeating. First of all, number 3. In the world of safety, there are 3 pillars to working on any safety issue. You have to work on the engineering, where you try to build the risk away. You have to work on behavior, where you try to get all of us to act a little bit differently so we're not at risk. And then you put regulation in place that actually helps reinforce both the engineering and the behavior. What we're talking about with this bill today is actually changing the regulatory piece of this conversation. We're trying to make it easier for law enforcement to tell whether I'm on my phone when I'm driving or not. And it's very simple. I can't have it in my hands. I can use it for other things. Colonel Lang will flinch when I say this, but if I'm offshore gambling through voice activation on some level, he's not as concerned about that as if I'm holding it up to my ear and I can no longer turn my head so I can see cars next to me. Second number is 4. Representative Hornstein alluded to these. There are 4 major causes of crashes as you lay up traffic safety: speed, distraction, fatigue, and impairment. So whenever the Safety Council thinks about moving forward on traffic, we want to work in one of those zones. Representatives Uglem and Hornstein identified distracted driving as a good place to go. So that's why we're all focused on that today. Next number is 14. 14 states have moved to hands-free cell phone use over time. The key word there is moved. It's been incremental, some of them over the course of almost 2 decades in various kinds of restrictions and bans. But everybody has gotten to the point now where they believe the next logical step is to go hands-free. It's just easier to manage the system that way. 2 numbers to lay in front of you, 9,000 and 85,000. 9,000 citations to 85,000 citations. That's what New York State has experienced as they moved to a more complete ban of texting and hands-free combined with some primary enforcement authority. Can we enforce our way to compliance with this law? No. Every law enforcement official on the planet will tell you you cannot enforce your way to compliance. However, the attention that enforcement brings, the attention that regulation brings is an important piece of that triangle to getting people to change their behavior. The last numbers I'd like to lay out in front of you are 1, 100, and 200. On a normal day in this state, 1 person dies on the roads, 100 are injured, and there's 200 crashes. This is all about preventing those at the end of the day. So thank you for letting us be part of this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Johnson from the Insurance Federation.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I come today speaking on behalf of a majority of auto insurers in Minnesota selling to the consumers statewide, and we're very pleased to be a part of this effort. A year ago in this room, there was a large group that had a press conference, 30-plus organizations, law enforcement, for a stepped-up enforcement of the law in terms of texting while driving. This is the year, and that was an important effort. 300 law enforcement agencies. This is the year. Let's take the next step in terms of that stepped-up enforcement and put the tools on the books and the statutes that can impact the negative numbers and the results that you've seen. From the auto insurer's perspective, I can tell you that we have seen in the last half a dozen years a step up and an increase in the premiums that consumers are paying throughout the state. The preceding half dozen years, we saw a very flat, which was good from a consumer perspective, premiums. And that stepped up premium, there's the number of crashes is part of that. There's other factors, increased medical costs, but there is no question that a significant factor is the uptick, the increase in the number of distracted drivers incidents. So it's one of the leading causes. So as that data continues to come within our industry and we can pull together those statistics, that we'll be able to document what that impact is. So this is translating to consumers' bottom line and what it costs them to own and operate and insure a car in Minnesota. When distracted driving is a factor, the most vulnerable, and Representative Hornstein mentioned it, but it's important to emphasize that, it's pedestrians and bicyclists and motorcyclists. So we're talking about a large group of not just the people in the car, but those people around when cars are driving that are significant impact. The last, there's a lot of statistics, but some of the statistics that we have, we show that 1 in 4 crashes today involves a cell phone use. 1 in 4 crashes, and the percentage of fatalities on the road that are attributable to distracted driving, 10%, and that's a number that's increasing, involves cell phone use. So there is no question about the negative impact and the pervasive impact on Minnesotans and consumers and drivers and society. And we're very pleased to be a part of this effort today, to endorse this legislation, to work with the authors, and to do everything we can as an industry to help adopt this in the law in Minnesota. And let's join those group of states that have taken concrete action to give the law enforcement throughout the state better tools and more useful tools to help combat this growing problem in society and in Minnesota. So I thank you for that, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Neuberger.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out today. I'm State Representative Jim Neuberger from House District 15B. I want to thank Representatives Uglem and Hornstein for allowing me the privilege to be part of this. This is an important piece of legislation. I'm on this because I bring a little bit of professional, angle to this. I am a full-time paramedic. I have been one for a major level 1 trauma center since 1988. Yeah, I'm old. But I would like to share with you an average, if you look at the data, a vehicle that's moving at 16 miles an hour travels about 44 feet per second. So if you pick up your phone, you look at your phone for 3 seconds, you've just traveled almost 100 well, 44 times 3, you know, do the math, 132 feet in 3 seconds. That's a lot of distance to carry, or that's a lot of distance to travel if you're not paying attention. That's only 3 seconds. This is a cell phone. I can tell you that the average distraction on a cell phone, in my opinion, is much more than 3 seconds. I think the insurance industry was rather forgiving with their statistics. The DPS, what I've got here on their website, there were 411 people that were killed in Minnesota in 2015. The number one cause of fatalities was drunk driving. We had 95 of our fellow Minnesotans perished in 2015. Number two cause of death was 78 people were killed because of speed-related factors. It's my guess is they probably blended together a little bit, but that was 78, number two cause. The number three cause, you can probably guess, was distracted driving, and there were 74 of our fellow Minnesotans were killed because of distracted driving. The fatalities has gone up 14% in the last year from distracted driving, 14%. It's my opinion that it'll probably surpass speeding in the future if the numbers keep marching out the way that the statistics are showing them. The time to do something is now. 2 summers ago, I was driving, my wife and I were driving back to the district. We were on Highway 10. We were out having a nice evening, and all of a sudden the traffic stopped. You know, you goes to that slow crawl. And my wife and I are looking at each other like, okay, something's up. We got into this slow crawl, and as we moved along, it took us about 15, 20 minutes to get up to where the crash was. It was in my district. I was horrified and shocked to see that there was a van that had been struck. It had been T-boned in an intersection. It was too late, really, for me to render any aid, as they had 2 helicopters on the ground. They had a number of ambulances and fire trucks and officers, so the best thing I could do was just not get in the way. I was hurt by that, deeply hurt. I wished I could have been there 20 minutes sooner, 25 minutes sooner when the crash had occurred. Perhaps I could have done more. But with that sets the stage. I would like to introduce Rhonda. Rhonda will, she'll give you the correct spelling for her name. When she comes up here, I always butcher it. Rhonda is a family member of the folks that were in the van at the time, and she will give you more details. Thank you for being here today. And again, I want to thank Representative Uglem and Representative Hornstein for bringing this bill forward. We need this bill.
First of all, I'd like to thank all you gentlemen for inviting me here today to tell my story. My family has suffered unimaginable pain due to this growing epidemic. I, like most people, never thought something like distracted driving would affect my life. That is until the evening of July 21st, 2015. I received the first call saying my Uncle Chuck and the girls had been in a crash. By the time I reached the hospital at 1 a.m., Chuck had already passed. I had the unfortunate experience of watching someone tell my 15-year-old cousin that her dad didn't make it. It was heartbreaking to watch. 10 days after the crash, and 4 days after we laid Chuck to rest, my cousin Cassie, who was 10, failed to make a turn towards recovery. It was a loss my family should not have had to endure. A conversation on Facebook while driving at 65 miles an hour is what took the life of Chuck and Cassie. A Ford F-150 extended cab barreled through a red light. My uncle was not the first car, but the second car to go through that intersection. He, however, did not make it through before his van was T-boned. I hear the word accident all the time. I understand the fact that you get in your car, you don't intend to hit, kill, or injure someone. The fact of the matter is, the statistics are out there. We all know them. They're plastered on billboards, TV commercials, radio commercials, the internet. With that being said, you're well aware that talking on your phone, texting on your phone while driving can kill you or somebody else. It makes it not an accident. It's a crash. What happened to Chuck and Cassie was not an accident. It was 100% preventable. To help me grieve the loss of my uncle and cousin, we created a foundation, Minnesotans Fighting Distracted Driving, and that is simply what we are out to do. We do presentations at schools and businesses to bring awareness of distracted driving to students and employees. We follow crashes around the state and reach out to families who have lost loved ones or have had their lives altered due to distracted driving. If we can change one person's mind on their driving habits, one person has a ripple effect, and we can reach many. The bill we are talking about today is overdue. Something needs to be done as the numbers of crashes due to distracted driving continue to rise. We cannot allow this epidemic to continue taking the lives of our loved ones. It is time we are part of a solution by ending distracted driving and focusing on our drives. We need to get off of our phones while we are behind the wheel. It is our responsibility to make our roads safe, and if attitudes and behaviors don't change about distracted driving, it could easily happen to you next. Thank you.
Could you say your name, please, and spell it,
Rhonda Maurer, Maurer,
and the name of the foundation?
Minnesotans Fighting Distracted Driving.
How do you spell Rhonda?
Rhonda.
Thank you, Rhonda. Well, you've heard it here. Now is the time for all Minnesotans to come together and address this terrible problem that we have. Now is the time for the legislature, both sides of the aisle, the professional community, to get together and do the right thing. Everyone in this room knows that. It's just a question of if we can do it or not. And I think we can. It's a well-thought-out bill. We spent all summer working on this thing, Frank and I did. And I think we have most of the bases covered. This will be going through and introduced probably this week. It'll be going through committees. We look forward to the rigorous process of questions and everything else, but I'm quite confident that we can get this passed and benefit all of Minnesota. We stand for questions.
Representative, will you tell us again, what are the penalties and if you think they are strong enough or just something to get through the legislature?
Thank you, Pat. The penalties in this bill do not change from what we have right now. We believe that people need a little chance to understand and become familiar with this hands-free requirement. So we are not changing the penalties in this bill. It is already illegal to drive distracted. Colonel Langer could tell you that. But we are not changing any penalties at this time.
What are they and are they strong enough?
Well, I guess that's a matter of opinion. The first penalty is very minimal, $50. The second penalty is what, $250? And there has been talk, and there may be increased penalties in the future.
And are those penalties specifically for texting, or is it, you know, I'm holding my phone up to my ear? I'm guessing we're talking about texting.
These penalties are for distracted driving. Texting is one part of it.
Why not make it like drunk driving?
Pat, that's a very good question. It may come to that. It's as serious as that. There's no question. And you know as well as I do that a lot of people are going to have a steep learning curve on this. And we're willing as legislators to provide them a little leeway. But this is very, very serious business. And the penalties could increase drastically in the future.
What about having a ban on cell phone use while driving? I mean, I understand, you know, holding it, you can't see one way, and maybe it encourages the person, or they go into texting fairly easily, but what about just out and out banning cell phone use while driving?
We have not considered that. You know, wireless communication devices are an integral part of modern society. There are some exceptions in this bill for first responders and emergency personnel. CBs are not covered under this and other things, but no, there's a lot of business that's done on cell phones, but we feel that hands-free is the way to go at this point in time.
Do you have a yardstick by which you'll measure success? So for example, I noticed at the bottom of this, it shows the number of citations increasing in different states. You know, for people who say, it seems like it actually would work to limit cell phone use, but does it actually work? How do we know that this is something that is saving lives? How will you measure that?
Well, our yardstick is to save lives, and if it's just a few, that's just fine with me. Like I say, we are not reinventing the wheel here. Many states, 14, have this type of prohibition, and I believe that there will be many more. This is a process, and like Paul Austin said, it's very difficult to legislate compliance, but we're going to do the best we can.
Question for Rhonda.
Oh,
Go ahead.
how many times has this gone through the legislative process in the past, and what has prevented it from succeeding?
Well, I think it's fair to say that nothing like this has gone through the legislative process. We've nibbled around the edges, but this is a comprehensive bill. So, and it's time. It's really time. No, this may not be the final say either in the future. But nothing like this has gone through the legislative process before.
And why not?
It should have. It should have. And sometimes I think Frank Hornstein and I have talked about this, and Jim Newberger, Representative Newberger, Senator Carlson, and this is the first time, I think, that everybody's banded together with industry experts and law enforcement to get a bill done that can pass, should pass, and will save lives.
Question for Rhonda. We've followed your story, of course, for a couple of years, and it's a terrible story. What's it like for you when you're driving down the road and people on both sides of you are using cell phones?
I have very high anxiety when I drive. It doesn't matter if anybody's texting by me or not. I can see it if you're a mile ahead of me and you're weaving in and out of your lane. Even driving down here today, I'm on a 3-lane road. I'm from Stock Rapids. We only have 2-lane roads, so it was even more stressful, and the ice was a little bit, it wasn't bad, but I just have very high anxiety when I drive now, and it's worse since the crash than even prior to the crash, because I know the statistics. I can spot the people in front of me that are doing it. I can see the people behind me that are doing it, and you have to pick, do you want to be in front of them or do you want to be behind them? Because neither position is safe. You just want to get as far away from them as possible.
Everybody feels that, I think, when they're driving down a freeway and you see people weaving a little bit.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels it. It's not a good feeling, and to see people out there risking not only their lives, but my life and my kids' lives and my friends' lives. We matter. They have, Craig Briggs lost his son, and he said it to me plain and simple. They have a seatbelt law. The seatbelt saves you. There's no cell phone law. And in the cell phone, you're risking yourself and others. That's why this bill is important.
Representative Hornstein and Senator Carlson have pushed this year after year. Are any of you are you converts to this, or do you sense that there's the mood is shifting toward this?
Definitely. You know, when we passed the bill last biennium to increase the penalties for texting while driving, it was not controversial. And, you know, that's, in the past, we've had controversy. Primary seatbelt was controversial. We had getting down to the .08 impairment was controversial. These were bills that were introduced early on and during my legislative tenure. Texting was not. And so I think that we are now moving towards a broader consensus in the state that this bill is necessary and it's urgent. And as has been said before, when you put this, when you're using this phone, you're putting yourself and others at risk. And I think as Rhonda's compelling story tells us, there are many people like her and many of us out there that feel, I think, additional anxiety on the roads because of what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. Now, I take the train into work every day, so I can see it from the train. And it's just as unnerving.
I can address that. Also, I believe the question was, are you seeing momentum here in the legislature? I'm from the more conservative side of the Republican Party, and I've had this discussion with some of the most conservative members of my caucus, and not one of them has looked at me and said, absolutely not. They're clearly open to this, and I preface the conversation by letting people know that we are not taking away your right to speak on the phone in the car. You can still talk on the phone. You just have to be hands-free. And once we establish that fact, I think that people are very open to this. Will this bill pass? I pray to God it does. But this is the legislature, so we'll see how this rolls out. I'm very confident that it'll pass, and all my hopes are with that.
Representative, you bring that up because, in general, conservatives believe that government should not get involved in regulating people's behavior?
That's part of the equation, Pat. But when you bring up the fact that why do we have guardrails on roads, it's the same type of analogy. We have roads and you can drive 70 miles an hour, but we put guardrails on those roads to protect you from driving off the road and into the ditch and having an accident. It's the same type of concept. This is a guardrail of sorts to keep us safe. We're not saying you can't drive. We're just saying we're going to put up a guardrail. And as Representative Hornstein, I think, alluded to, most of our new cars already have built-in wireless technology. This is not going to, as technology advances, this is not going to be a big hurdle for people, in my opinion. Thank you.
Jim Carlson from represent District 51 in Egan and Burnsville, and I've carried this a couple of times. And to answer the question about why it hasn't passed, I have attempted to get co-signers and to get people on both sides of the aisle to support this in the past, and even people, my seatmate in 2008 would not support it, a DFLer. And this has now gotten to the point where almost all of you have experiences with driving behind someone and they're driving erratically, and you're wondering whether it's they're under the influence or whether they're just being distracted. And I usually drive, what did we say, close to the speed limit. I'm not going to say which side of the limit, but oftentimes you come up behind someone and they're in the left-hand lane driving under the speed limit, and maybe even significantly under the speed limit, and you wonder why they don't move over. I've driven enough in Europe to know that you don't go around people on the right, because that is actually against the law in Germany. But so I hover behind this person while they're weaving back and forth. And then finally, when either I lose patience and do go around on the right, or they move over to the right, and then I see that they're on their cell phone. And this is something that I'm experiencing far more now than I did 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. So it's now something that everybody has in their attention. And my wife used to tell, well, I used to tell my wife I wanted to make a bumper sticker that said, "Hang up and drive," and she thought that was too harsh. And I think we do need that kind of attitude. Hang up and drive, get off the phone and drive, because that's your responsibility when you are on the road. And the last thing was, 2 years ago, I had this bill jacketed, and it wasn't exactly the same, and it's much better now. But I had it jacketed, and I presented it to the students of Burnsville High School. And I said, how many of you are in favor of banning handheld phones? And a significant number raised their hands. How many are you opposed? And very few hands went up. So right then and there in front of them, I signed my name onto that bill, and We introduced it, but, it was already past deadlines. But I'm shocked that the young people are on board with this as well. And I think that's just a great thing. You always think about young people being distracted, young people, paying too much attention to their cell phones. But the young people also see the problem now. And so they're behind it. Our representatives and senators are behind it. And I think this is the time to get it done.
Senator, you
Yes.
have a co-sponsor on the other side of the aisle, though, over in the Senate? Well, if that's the case, what does that tell us?
I do not have a co-sponsor because we just were ready to drop the bill. We had the final. In fact, I just got the final jacket right now, so I was holding on to the older jackets we had. So, yes, and in fact, right now, I'm supposed to be in the Transportation Committee, and I have 2 people I'm going to drop on when I get back over there.
Do you anticipate that you will secure a Republican sponsor for this bill on the Senate side? Co-sponsor?
In the matter of extreme hope, yes. Yes, I do. And I've had one before.
On the matter of extreme hope?
Yeah, I've had one
Is it
before.
a long shot, or
No, I think it's, I think if I remember correctly, I did have one in one of my past bills. So that's, I don't see that as a problem. Again, everybody's recognizing that the issue is now a problem. And by the way, I think to answer Mr. Kessler's question, at one time, and I sponsored the bill on enhanced penalty for distracted driving. That was a tough bill to get passed because we needed to show intent, and we needed to punish the intent to be distracted when you drive. So this one, maybe we can increase the penalty, maybe there's something that can be done, but I think as Representative Uglem said, this is to get this passed right now without getting involved in an enhanced penalty or a large fine.
Would this make it a primary offense, or would there have to be some other reason for a stop?
This is a primary offense, yes. Yeah, texting while driving is a primary offense already. Thank you.
And I would just like to say that this is not about politics. This is not about Republican sponsors, Democratic sponsors, and all of that. This is about doing the right thing for the people of Minnesota and saving lives. So I would say to each and every one of my colleagues, some that are here and some that aren't, that we must pass this bill. This is a must bill for this session. And I hope the governor will see fit also to add his signature, and I have every confidence that he will. Are there any other questions?
Yes, Representative. Some of the states have partial bans, right? Texas and Wisconsin, neighboring Wisconsin as an example. Is there a way you can characterize the nature of those partial bans for us?
I actually do not have, I do know that, but I do not have that data with me today, and why, perhaps, Paul?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I can give you a short answer. Most of the partial bans are related to age of driver. So it's often part of the graduated driver's license process or something similar to that.
Isn't Minnesota in that category
Yes,
too? Then?
exactly.
Yeah.
So this would move Minnesota out of that GDL-driven partial for every use of that cell device, not just the texting ban that goes through all ages.
Asking as Minnesota has indicated as no ban, but really maybe we're more in that blue category as opposed to the gray.
Yeah, and that's from the Insurance Institute, so it's a degree of interpretation that they put on the requirements.
Is there any, between the ban, the total ban on handheld and where we are now, is there any compromise position that might endanger your initiative here?
In my opinion, no. And here's why. You have to remember that the issue of partial bans, whether they're age-driven or time-of-day driven or technology-driven, are aimed at the safety side of the equation. We're clearly interested in the safety side of the equation. However, the hands-free portion of this bill is largely to enable enforcement. As it sits today, with the way the texting ban is written, that law enforcement officer doesn't know when you're hanging onto that phone if you're texting or if you're calling. So it's very hard to even get the first $50 ticket, much less the second $250 ticket going. So that enhanced enforcement and that enhanced penalty that does exist in law today hasn't really been triggered because the front-end trigger of that system has been uncertain. So that's where I think this is really aimed at that certainty around activity that enables law enforcement to start that ball moving and let us see where that enhanced enforcement brings us.
Could you spell your first and last name?
First name is Paul, last name is Aasen, A-A-S-E-N.
All right, one more question, and then we'll break for individual afterwards. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I actually have a comment, less of a question. I'm a member of a club that Rhonda belongs to. My daughter was killed close to 10 years ago.
Why don't you come up here, sir?
Everyone come up. Go right ahead.
Give us your name too, sir, if you wouldn't mind, and spell it.
Sure, yes. My first name is Vijay, V-I-J-A-Y, and last name is Dixit, D as in David, I-X-I-T. So my daughter Shreya was 19 when she was killed by a distracted driver. Her fault was she was sitting as a passenger in the front seat. And the driver who got distracted probably was doing something we still do not know to this day. That's a mystery to us. But in the process, she killed my daughter. Rhonda, your grief is 2 years old, mine is 8. We belong to the same club. I have seniority on you. Not that I'm very proud of it, but that's what it is. And I would like to thank Representative Hornstein. And remember, Senator Hornstein, when we were on Mary Hansen show 2 years ago, we were hoping that the numbers would go down.
Yes.
Rhonda's example shows that the numbers have not gone down. In fact, even for 2016, the preliminary numbers are close to 412. So we are flat, need to do something. And I have a foundation which is 10 years old, and also I have written a book. It's called One Split Second, and I'll be very happy to give to anyone who asks for one. There to take. Senator Klobuchar has been kind to have written the foreword for it. So thank you very much for everything. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. We'll end this news conference now. We'll stick around for any further questions you may have on an individual basis. But thank you so much for coming, and I hope we can get this done.